Hey everyone, welcome. So, I'm going to talk about one of the chapters in Byung-Chul Han's Saving Beauty. I know I have another video on it that I've done in the past, but I'm going to start with the last chapter, so I don't think I covered that. And also, I'm going to be on a podcast talking about this book tomorrow, so I need to start going over it, and I thought I would just have you all along on the ride. How do you say that saying? I don't even know. Oh my goodness. There are pages that are stuck together. They're so amazing. All right, so just as a summary from what I remember, Byung-Chul Han has this idea that there are certain aspects of the human experience that are very important and essential to us, to our dust sign, our ontology, that are missing because of the extreme version of capitalism that currently gives our life context and meaning, I suppose, or directs us, so that we become self-exploiters because we want to get out of the thumb of the boss and be our own boss and have our own jobs, but then that means that our work might be like 24/7, and we just keep pushing ourselves, even if we're in a job like an institution of some kind, an organization. We want to advance and get bigger and better so we can get more money, and it's all about production and doing and profit. And so there becomes an imbalance in our lives. If everything we do, even the production of art, the creation of art, even our relationships, even how we see and treat ourselves, if everything is under the kind of modes of consumption and production, then what are we devaluing? What are we missing in our lives? And so Byung-Chul Han really harkens back to what was available in the pre-modern, and I don't exactly understand why he does this, but Baudrillard does this as well. And yeah, I was gonna say like Lyotard maybe, but I don't know if Lyotard really does. I have to read more of him to see. So a lot of people commenting and critiquing the postmodern era, which, I know there's a lot of arguments and discussions like, are we in the postmodern era? Have we, transcended that and gone beyond? Han doesn't use the word postmodern. He really critiques neoliberalism, which is a fetishization, that doesn't sound right, of capitalism. And he critiques the information age, the technological age. He calls it, an age of information instead of knowledge and meaning and discourse, because knowledge and meaning and discourse take time. It flows and moves on another kind of temporality. And when you read Baudrillard, especially his Simulacra, he talks a lot about charm. There's this charm missing, and Han says that there's sort of like the sacred and the divine and mystery missing. Even the grittiness and the, kind of almost courageous encounter with the elements and nature and with other bodies, and, including like struggle and violence. And Baudrillard in his chapter Animals and Simulacrum will talk about like how animals were treated in pre-modern times, even like around sacrifice, that allowed the animals and human beings who were sacrificing them dignity in how they were approaching the sacrifice. And Han, has his book on the disappearance of rituals, and when he talks about rituals, he's mainly talking about pre-modern rituals. And there are just ways that we have lived in the past that Han harkens back to. He doesn't like the new version of whatever we are and however we're being. And so in this book, he's really looking at beauty, but he's returning to ideas and concepts such as Eros, like in the agony of Eros. And also like the mystery and the sacred and the cycles of the pre-modern, to kind of re-envision what true beauty is. Because you can't have beauty, you can't really have creativity or art if you are just worried about gaining followers, gaining likes, pleasing the public, staying within their good graces, avoiding getting canceled, and making lots of money, right? I mean, is that the realm that creativity really emerges and arises? So he's going to say no. He's going to critique the selfie. He's going to critique filters on Instagram. Anything that helps smooth out. He really critiques smoothness too. Anything that smooths out any flaws or any even artistry to make it the content super digestible and super agreeable. He looks at this one artist named Jeff Koons, who has these structures that he creates that almost look like shiny balloon animals, and they're reflective surfaces. So, Han, points at that and sees narcissism and sorry. So he really sees beauty as something kind of Heideggerian almost. When Heidegger talks about in various lectures of his, like what is called thinking, art and technology, etc., when he's talking about a true encounter with art and a true encounter with nature, he critiques the idea that we are making everything standing reserve, just kind of shelving whatever is there until we have some use for it. So nature is reduced to what we can use it for. And you can see how harmful and problematic this would make our relationships as well, right? If there's exchange value. I mean, the worst thing you can do in a relationship, well, I guess there are many bad things, but one of the problematic things you can do in a relationship is create this sort of dynamic of transaction. And it doesn't have to be economic. I mean, just calculating pros and cons, wanting the relationship just to be likable, digestible, to not work at it. Anytime that efficiency is prioritized, what can you not do? And I always think about this scene in The L Word where I think Bet is, maybe she's already dean at the university that she is employed at. And there's this construction worker that, of course, she gets involved with. But anyway, that's not the point. The construction worker comes in and says, I think Bet says, I need this to be low cost, and I need it to be fast, and I need it to be good. And I think she called it construction work. That's not right. I don't know. I've been studying Spanish all day, which means that I just don't know any languages. Is she an architect? Is that the word? What's the name for the people that come in and they build stuff inside buildings? I don't know. A builder? So anyway, this woman, she knows how to do things inside the building. Build stuff. Why am I having the worst trouble with, I don't And anyway, she draws a picture and she says, okay, so this is just a rule of the universe. You can't have all these three things. And I think she makes like a triangle or something, and she writes, fast, good, and cheap on each of the corners. And she says, you can have maybe two of these, but you definitely can't have all three. So what do you want? And so you're going to have to leave something out if you're focusing on money and you're focusing on speeding up time, basically, or speeding up your activities in time. So let's go ahead and get into it. Giving birth in beauty. What does that mean? There's a poem at the beginning, which I think I'm going to skip and just start with the text. In the Symposium, Plato sets up a gradation of beauty. The lover of beauty is not content with a view of a beautiful body. He or she moves up the ladder beyond ordinary beauty to the point of beauty as such. So he's kind of saying that, there are less worthy, I guess, manifestations of beauty. And so, there's a beautiful person, a beautiful face, a beautiful landscape. But then there's also like elevated ideas of beauty, like truth is beauty and justice is beauty, and beauty as like the ultimate ideal that's always abstract and always elusive. So that is the gradation, maybe from like the material or the immanent to the transcendent. That's what we're talking about here. However, the inclination towards beautiful bodies is not condemned. So, Han is going to tell us how to take a better selfie, basically. Rather, it is an essential part, even the necessary initial point of the ascent towards beauty. The specificity of Plato's theory of beauty is that the attitude towards beauty is not passive and consumptive, but active and generative. So think about on Instagram, posting selfies, just one after the other. Every day you get a new selfie. It's beautiful, it's smooth, it's easily likable, you enjoy looking at it, and then you move on. So there's not really any interaction, right? I mean, you like it, maybe you want to post a comment to talk about the beauty, or like to just, show your appreciation or whatever it may be, but then you move on and that's it. There's not really a conversation, there's not a transformation, a transformative kind of interaction or encounter. There's not any sort of spiritual, sacred energy that's happening. Think about Heidegger and his sort of like looking at a painting and what elements come to life and why. Art and anything really has more meaning if there is sort of a reciprocal kind of engagement, and there's like an element almost of the sublime or of awe and annihilation, even surpassing the ego. Like Han really wants a lot from beauty. Faced with beauty, the soul is driven to create something beautiful itself. So it's not just that we take an image in on, social media and, it arouses us, or it, pleases us, or whatever it is. It should, if it's really art and it's really beautiful, it should inspire us to create beauty. And, some images on social media, I'm not going to, I guess it seems like I'm just kind of judging, putting a blanket over social media. No, I mean, there's some gems, right? So when viewing beauty, Eros awakens a procreative capacity in the soul. Thus he calls it giving birth in beauty. Through beauty, Eros has access to what is immortal. The immortal children begotten by him are works, not just poetic or philosophical works, but also political works. So here we're bringing in Eros, and we're bringing in the political. Sounds a lot like Audre Lorde's uses of the erotic. right? Her 1978 essay on how we can't just reduce the erotic to sex and relegate it to the bedroom, but Eros is a feeling of empowerment and sensuality and passion and generative creativity that helps direct us in our activism, in changing the world, in battling oppression, in leading us to create through freedom a life that is a piece of art. You know, it also, I guess, then reminds you of Sartre's idea of freedom, that, you know, it's not that we're finding ourselves, but that we're creating ourselves. We are a mosaic. So bringing the political in here, I'm really glad I've read Audre Lorde. Thus, Plato praises the works of poets like Homer or Hesiod, as well as those of rulers such as Solon or Lycurgus. Beautiful laws are the work of Eros. It is not only philosophers or poets who are eroticists, but also politicians. Beautiful political deeds, so he's creating space. Like philosophical works, owe their origin to Eros. A politics that is guided by Eros is a politics of beauty. So he talks about, Han does in one of his other books, about how the political arena is no longer a place of discourse. It's quick. It's more of an ego-driven spectacle. You know, I've watched many a presidential debate, and you go away from the hour not feeling like you didn't really have an authentic, sincere encounter with another human being or any ideas. You just went away as if it was an hour of, you know, bad entertainment with people who are so bent on winning that there's not a conversation. You know, it's the same thing on Twitter, really. There's a lot of ego on Twitter, and what I mean by that is that sometimes when I try to engage with someone or comment, I have to realize pretty quickly that they didn't make their comment to invite people in to discuss and enjoy the pleasure of intellectual stimulation. They wanted to put something out there in a very aggressive and contrary way. And it doesn't matter what you say, even if you're saying, you know, oh, this is really interesting. I'm reading this right now, and I would love to know what you would think, like clarify maybe what you're saying, or like, you know, or you're asking a question. They're just snarky. They're not a teacher, you know? Like a teacher is nourishing, a teacher or nurturing, nourishing. Teacher is not like a bowl of pudding, right? Like nourishing, nurturing, and an instructor or professor loves your questions and has more questions for you. And the whole point is just to have a conversation and to keep it going, right? There's this sort of innocence and politeness and respect and beauty and intimacy and eros that comes into the intellectual. But that's not always the agenda of people who are posting, I think, on social media. And it's, you know, it's sad. As a deity, Eros consecrates thinking. Okay, so thinking is a part of beauty as well. Like he's bringing in all of these elements. So when we went to ask, you know, how is Han defining beauty? We have to look at, you know, the very complicated, nuanced sort of concept he's trying to build. Socrates is initiated to the mysteries of Eros by Diotima. These mysteries escape both knowledge and speech, or the episteme and logos. Heidegger was an eroticist too. According to him, it is Eros who gives wings to thought and guides it. I call it Eros, the oldest of the gods, according to Parmenides. The beat of that god's wings moves me each time I take a substantial step in my thinking and venture onto untrodden paths. So it's this idea that pursuing a project, thinking, writing, doing an academic's work that he was doing, there's some sensuality to that. There's some passion, there's inspiration, there's life, and there's energy, and there's high vibrations. And that's what Han wants. Without the participation of Eros, thinking is degraded to pure work. Work, which is opposed to Eros, so I think he means pure work, is opposed to Eros, desecrates and disenchants thinking. The place of beauty, according to Heidegger, is not in the aesthetic, but in the ontological realm. He is a Platonist. Beauty, Heidegger says, is the poetic name for being. Eros is directed at being, but being is understood in striving for being, or as the Greeks say, in Eros. Sorry, it was... Sorry, I'm having a little bit of allergies. It was written in, the Greek script. Okay, beauty is given an ontological consecration. And so, if you are newer to philosophy, all it means when we're talking about ontology is we're talking about the very ground of being. We're talking about essences. The ontological difference distinguishes beings from beings. Beings are all that is, but it owes its meaning to being. Being is not the ground from which beings emerge, but the horizon of sense and understanding, in the light of which an understanding of self-comportment towards beings becomes possible in the first place. So, I think what Han is trying to focus on, and Heidegger is, focus on from Heidegger's work, is that there is this, and it also is kind of I don't know, if you've read Whitehead, that might help you, but it's an essence that isn't something that's static. It's more of a movement or a dynamic or an activity that Han is trying to tease out here from Heidegger. Heidegger, for instance, I'm reading Being and Nothingness right now by Jean-Paul Sartre, and he is saying that what we are, the being that we are, design, what design is, which design is just a German word that Heidegger kind of coined that means being, the ontological being. It is possibility. It is openness. It is a movement toward the future that can never... We are what we could be and what we could choose. And so it's kind of like an ungrounded ground, in a sense. Heidegger explicitly understands the beautiful as a phenomenon of truth beyond aesthetic pleasure. So basically, Han thinks we're reducing beauty. Truth is the truth of being. Beauty does not occur apart from this truth. It appears when truth sets itself into the work. This appearing as this being of truth in the work and as the work is beauty. Thus, beauty belongs to the advent of truth. It does not exist merely relative to pleasure and purely as its object. So when it says this appearing, that reminds me that Heidegger, the way he's connecting art and truth is that art should disclose or reveal something that is true, and not truth as reduced to a proposition of true false, but something like a revelation that's almost spiritual in nature, I think. Truth as the truth of being is a process, an event, which confers meaning and significance onto beings in the first place. Thus, a new truth lets beings appear in an altogether different light and changes our relationship with our world, our understanding of reality. It lets everything appear differently. So you can see how this is a very holistic transformation that's happening. The advent of truth defines anew what is real. It brings forth another is. The work is the place which receives and embodies the advent of truth. Eros is inclined toward the beautiful, the appearance of truth. This is where he differs from pleasure. A time in which pleasure, the like, is predominant, Heidegger would say, is a time without eros, without beauty. So, why is he not wanting to just prioritize something like pleasure when he's talking about eros and when he's talking about beauty and when he's talking about truth? It's not that pleasure isn't a part of it, but he wants, again, an experience that's a little more complicated and nuanced and holistic. If you just have pleasure, the Sufi poet Rumi has this poem called The City of Saba, where he says that, or he creates this world where no one has to do any work, no one has to struggle, there's no suffering, there's no pain. It's just, beautiful wine and food drops into your mouth. You don't have to cook it or do anything. And he says that everyone, ended up getting really bored and sick because all they had was pleasure. There's something else that you need in order to grow, in order to be empowered and live and move. And Han kind of wants to bring that into the picture. Beauty as the advent of truth is generative, creative, even poetic. It gives something to see. This given gift is beautiful. The work is not beautiful as a product, but as the shining through of truth. Beauty also transcends disinterested pleasure. The aesthetic has no access to beauty in the emphatic sense. Beauty as the shining through of truth is inconspicuous, insofar as it hides behind the phenomenon. So there's this idea of the sacred in a sense, because there's the idea of the elusive, something that's there that you can't really grasp. In Plato, too, it is necessary to ignore beautiful forms to a certain extent in order to become capable of seeing beauty as such. Today, all consecration is taken away from beauty. It is no longer an occurrence of truth. So consecrate is a very theologically embraced word. No ontological difference and no eros protects beauty against consumption. It is merely one of the beings, something that is simply given and present in its ordinariness. One simply comes across it as an object causing immediate pleasure, which Han does not like. The giving birth in beauty gives way to beauty as a product, as an object for consumption and aesthetic pleasure. Now, I think he's not necessarily giving enough credit to the term aesthetic and what it could mean. I think the aesthetic is a very beautiful word, and it could be nuanced. And we could look at its etymology, and this is one thing that I maybe don't love about Han, is that he, at least, and I know that I'm reading in translation, but it's almost like he's demonizing certain words unnecessarily. The beautiful is what commits us. It founds duration. Okay, so here we have time, which he sort of mentions in every single one of his works, I think. It is no coincidence that beauty itself, by itself, with itself, in Plato, always is, and neither comes to be nor passes away. It is what commits us, what gives the measure, the gift of measure, as such. Eros means striving for what is binding. Badiou would call it fidelity. In his praise of love, he writes, "But what they are always saying is, I shall extract something else from what was mere chance. I'm going to extract something that will endure, something that will persist, a commitment, a fidelity." And here I am using the word fidelity with my own philosophical jargon, stripped of its usual connotations. It means precisely that transition from random encounter to a construction that is resilient as it had been necessary. So, whenever anyone uses the word binding, so eros means striving for what is binding, makes me think of what some people say the source and the etymology is of religion. Religion is something that binds. So not necessarily necessitating the God or any of the particular practices or morals or beliefs. It is what brings elements together to create some kind of story, I guess, that is meaningful. Fidelity and what commits us are mutually dependent. Commitment demands fidelity. Fidelity presupposes commitment. Fidelity is unconditional. So that's interesting. So he is tying commitment to what is beautiful as well. This is what constitutes its metaphysics, its transcendence even. The increasing aestheticization of every day renders especially the experience of beauty as the experience of what commits us impossible. It only produces objects for a fleeting pleasure. The increasing volatility not only concerns the financial markets. At present, it takes hold of society as a whole. Nothing lasts or endures. The radical contingency awakens a longing for something that commits us, something beyond the ordinary. Today we are faced with a crisis of beauty. So there you go, that's his thesis. Insofar as the beautiful is smoothed out into objects of pleasure, of the like, into something arbitrary and comfortable. The saving of beauty is the saving of that which commits us. So Han wants a relationship. He wants a transformation. He wants, and that was the end of the chapter, something that requires, something that invites an experience. And he's just not getting that. All right, well, thank you so much. I will see you next time for another chapter.